Hey, what's up, you guys? Akromaniac here. So as you can see, I finally have a webcam going. I do have a mic as well, and I've done multiple quality checks with the two of them. Trying to make sure that they're in sync, that they're of decent quality. To my understanding, these are two of some of the highest qualities that is actually kind of there on the market. Unless I'm trying to be like in terms of the mic, unless I'm trying to be like a singer, a professional singer or something. So sort of like the next step down, But I'm trying to make this attempt to legitimately actually put out high level, high quality content for the channel and to actually make this channel be the haven, for teaching fighting games and actually educating the audience and educating all these newcomers and even existing players, developers, different companies, viewers, sponsors, basically all of the above. It's trying to really bridge that gap between it's simply just being something that you spectate, something that you turn on, and you just mash buttons, and trying to bridge that into an actual understanding of what this genre actually is and what it entails. So, segueing from that at its simplest form, and I know that I've used this example many times. If you follow my content already, you may have heard me use this analogy several times, and I still stick by it, but at the same time, I do want to elaborate on it some more. So, I always compare fighting games to essentially next level chess in a sense that, in terms of analogies, chess is a very level playing field. Both sides are of equal capacities, same amount of pieces, same amount of moves, same amount of possibilities, and it's really just a battle of the mind. Sort of like playing out a game of war, essentially. It's very strategic, it's turn based, but at the end of the day, you were trying to basically get that final kill, and that final kill is by killing the king. You can basically think of the king as your final pixel, And within fighting games, it kind of operates in a very similar fashion. And fighting games are really more closely aligned to speed chess because it happens a lot quicker. Regular chess, you're obviously on a timer, but you can take some time to plan out your next move or to plan out your next following moves. Thinking 5 steps ahead, 10 steps ahead, whatever it may be. But actually being able to take the time out is pretty huge, and that is a component of chess. Whereas with speed chess, it's like what the name implies, you're going as quickly as you can. Like, I think there's only a couple of minutes that are actually on the clock that you have there. So fighting games are very similar within that fashion within itself. The difference though is that while it still is a mental sport and it still is a battle of the mind itself, fighting games are more closely related to really being a battle of the brain, because you're actually really trying to compete against the opponent, and you're trying to not only challenge their mental capacity, you're also trying to challenge their physical capabilities at the same time too. You're messing with their reaction times, and you're also messing with their hand-eye coordination within itself, like their actual dexterity and what they're capable of doing, and exploiting all those things all encompassed into one. So that's what I'm saying. It's more of a battle of the brain. It's not really just mental. There's a lot more components to it, and that's what, circling back, that's what I mean by, I still stand by the analogy that it's next level chess, but it takes it that much further because of the physical side that comes within it, as well as the execution, and the combos and the tech and etc. etc. So now, for some of you that have been following my content, or that you know of me, or just simply come across my channel overall, you may have noticed that I've been focusing primarily, or my sole focus overall has been the Injustice 2 series within fighting games, or even just NetherRealm games as a whole. So, just as a quick background for that, realistically for me, it just deals with the aesthetic. That's what actually just sparked it within me as a whole. I simply like their style more. I think it's kind of ironic, it's kind of funny that every single fighting game community, aka FGC, that is the acronym for them, every single FGC division, they all seem to idolize their own genres, they idolize their own games or companies, and they're just kind of oblivious as to how silly it really looks just in the grand scheme of things as a whole, or how aesthetically displeasing a lot of their stuff actually is. Obviously NetherRealm is no exception to that, but I feel that when you actually just ask a general audience what would be more visually pleasing, what is actually, obtainable to the eye, what they can actually track, what they can keep up with, I feel like it's a lot easier to actually track something like Mortal Kombat, or at least earlier titles, or specifically even Injustice, realistically. Just because it has, or at least Injustice 2, it has that level of realism that draws in your attention, but at the same time, it's not so overtly exaggerated that you can still track things. You know, you can obviously tell this big tentacle monster, somebody like Brainiac, for example, doesn't exist in real life, isn't a real character, isn't a real person. Same with Starfire, her hair's on fucking fire. You know, like, these people, they don't actually exist, but it's done tastefully enough that you can follow what is actually occurring. You can track the movements, you can track what the characters' animations are actually doing and what the actions actually are interacting with. Whereas with other games, I feel that, and mind you, I've played a good portion of these, I feel like they're too colorful, they're too explosive, they're too like chibi, they're so like they're so bursting with effects, you know, and I understand that that can be sort of a staple within the genre within itself, or a staple within just gaming as a whole. But if you really want audience to take it seriously, if you actually expect it to take on, you know, the big stage and actually be renowned and actually circle among, you know, like society as a whole and actually be held up to this standard and on this pedestal, you have to take it seriously within itself too. It has to be taken seriously, you know? And that's sort of my gripe, and that's predominantly why I've always gravitated towards NetherRealm games, at least when they actually started taking themselves a little bit more seriously, you know? So that's kind of its own background within itself, but part of why I focus so much on Injustice 2 is because I stand by it still to this day. I'm still playing, like let's say, like new coming titles. I've played Soul Calibur 5, Soul Calibur 6, Tekken 7, a little bit, Tekken 8, Street Fighter 5 I dabbled with, Street Fighter 6 I have not actually touched at all. I just seen gameplay of it. Did play a little Dead or Alive. I've played Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I started off in Smash. I was originally a Smash player. I was actually a really good Smash player. And then with NRS titles, started with MK9, then Injustice, MKX, Injustice 2. MK11 was terrible. MK1 is horrible. You know, but just to give a scope of all of these games that I've, you know, actually like started with or have been expanding my, I guess, my resume for. Guilty Gear as well, I did play for a little bit. And the thing is, it's like, these kinds of games, I don't post content with it, or I don't post stuff simply because they don't draw my attention to that degree that I'm like, oh my god, I really, really, really want to grind this, you know, and I want to teach this, and I feel that it's worth actually spreading the word, you know, and enticing people. I just don't think that they're kind of really worth it. I'm not trying to knock these companies or these games or saying that they're inherently bad. It's more of, I feel that for fighting games, there has to be a level set foundation as a whole, you know, for it to actually simply just be considered to begin with. And part of that, again, leads back to the aesthetic. Part of that leads to the foundation. Part of that, at the same time too, this is also why I never stuck with the likes of Tekken or Dead or Alive or Soul Calibur, is that certain concepts are just very outdated. One example, one core one, is I think playing a 3D fighter on a 2D plane or on a 2D space where both players are trying to share the screen is absurd. You know, I understand coming up with that concept over 10 years ago, over a decade ago, maybe even longer. I get that part of it. It kind of baffles me that they still have not realized just how outdated that concept is within itself. Because at the same time too, I play all these fighting games, but I've also dabbled within other games, with first-person shooters, with open-world games, with third-person perspective type of MOBAs, you know, like Smite, for example, or Fortnite, even, if you want to consider that. That's like a PUBG, you know, whatever you want to call those. But my understanding from all these kinds of games, all this experience, thousands upon thousands of hours of actually clocking in, trying to play these games and understand them, and just understanding all these interfaces, is that when it comes to fighting games, when you're actually trying to do battle, when it's an actual 1v1, it's actually one person against another person, if you're supposed to share the same screen, it can only be in 2D. There's no other way around it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If the two of you are fighting and you're meant to share the same screen, you have to be, it can only be 2D. That's it. That's just End of that. If you're trying to actually have a like a 3D open world combat experience, then there has to be two separate screens for each player. That's the only way that it can possibly work. Because then you have games, again, like Tekken, like DOA, like Soul Calibur, where they're designing the characters, they're designing attacks, they're designing movesets and kits and characters, and they're trying to take into account all of the blind spots, all the areas that you simply cannot take into account because you're trying to navigate in this fucking area that you can't even see behind a character, or if one character basically has priority, and they're the ones that actually have the priority of the camera angle within itself, you as the opposing player, you don't have that same interaction. So a lot of it is kind of just guessing and making really, really hard reads as to what's going to wind up where. And it's not some high level shit. Like it's not actually like, oh my god, like that's a big brain play. It's more of, oh, excuse me, you're really trying to take into account an actual angle, an actual position in time and space that you literally cannot even see. You can't take it into account. So you're just making a guess. And all because you have this outdated concept of a 3D fighting space on a 2D plane. While you're trying to share the same exact screen. Like, it doesn't work. So that's kind of my whole grievance with that. Like, that's what I'm trying to actually get across with that point. So, like, with all of that background within itself, all of that rambling, and all of that context within all these kinds of games, all of that is predominantly why I focus so much time on Injustice 2, because it's done everything so well, or as close to being as good as it can be, that in my opinion, I think it's really the only fighting game that comes the closest to being the actual foundation, the setting stone as to what future installments should build themselves off of. Because I understand that not everything should be the same. I do agree with that. I do agree that not everything has to have the same exact bones per se. You have something like Call of Duty, and then you have something like Apex, and then you have something like Overwatch, where they're still technically first-person shooters all across the board, but each game operates very differently. Same with Valorant, for example. They have their own like little subsets. That itself is not a bad thing. I do encourage that. However, at the same exact time, the core itself, the foundation itself, with first-person shooters, it's actually fairly simple. It's very, very straightforward because they are that simplified. I've seen this argument. I know I'm derailing a little bit, but I've seen this argument, ironically, even from top fighting game players, that say that team-based games are so much more harder, because there's so much more to take into account. They're really not harder. You're taking into account like 5 different fucking moves, from the opposing player. Even if you multiply with the amount of players that there are, like let's say it's a 5v5 or a 6v6, you're still only taking into account 30 different combinations, or 30 different attacks that could be coming your way across 6 different characters. That's not the same thing as taking into account 50 different attacks with all these different kinds of interlacing combinations from just one singular person, that's capable of interacting still within that entire screen, within all that capacity, And on top of that too, within fighting games, for the most part, unless it's something that is dependent on a resource, just about everything or a good portion of your moveset you can just use whenever. So long as you're not going to get punished, so long as there's no actual penalty for it, you can just keep throwing it out. With first-person shooters, it's like, or even team-based games, everything's on a cooldown. So if somebody tosses like a harpoon or something that's supposed to freeze you in place, oh my god, I gotta take that into account, because if you get hit, I get frozen, I get stunned, I get comboed to death. Let's say they toss it and they miss, you don't have to take that into account anymore, for X amount of time. And then there's still different moves that you can counter with. I digress. Whole point is, it's just that, so the thing is, so first-person shooters, they are very simple in that regard, because it's just basic inputs, cooldown, and that's it. Drop the health to 0, the character dies. Build up enough like experience or points or whatever kind of system that the game has, you get some kind of ultimate. You get some kind of like extra added ability. They're very, very simple. They're very straightforward. They all do the same thing. If you hit somebody in the head, like if you actually get a headshot, typically that does twice the amount of damage. That's like universal. Like no matter what kind of a game it is, that typically just stays the same no matter what. With fighting games, there are so many more layers that are onto it. You know, it's so stacked that you still do need these core foundational pieces, but it's a significantly longer list as to what that foundation is supposed to be. And the thing is, an actual accurate and actual balanced and very, very strong and fleshed out foundation within itself, I truly feel that Injustice 2 is the only one that actually got the closest to it. All these other fighting games, they kind of just don't. They're sort of just, they're trying too hard to be their own thing without even understanding the genre that they're trying to partake in, if that makes sense. You know, whereas Injustice 2, I feel like it actually really tried to get a sound understanding of itself. I know that I, myself, I'm guilty of it. I take accountability for it. I know that I've spoken a lot of shit about Injustice 2 in the past, you know, like when the game was alive, made all these kinds of posts. I still stand by a good portion of them, even just the frustrations, but at the same exact time, the understanding that I have of the game now, I've actually come to terms and I've realized that Paulo actually is not the one that did the balancing for the game, at least not entirely. You know, there were certain things that obviously he had a hand in, but the actual mind, the actual mastermind, really, that went around to designing the foundation of the game and designs of the characters and how all of the interface itself actually interacts within itself, it's actually pretty genius. You know, they didn't obviously take into account and calculate every single individual thing, but they took into account enough of the core that no matter which way it kind of functioned, it will still fall into place. And no previous NRS title had ever actually done that, nor has any NRS title outside of that actually done it. You know, nor has any other game that I've ever played actually taken all of that into account too. And the only logical and actual outlier that makes sense, you know, as to why that is just because DC was such a big component as to the development of the game. And DC, you can even look it up when it comes to the Injustice 2, like projects within themselves. DC had their own developers that were working on the game. So it makes sense as to why that game just like stands out all on its own. So basically the last thing that I want to really close out with, just because I feel like that was just a lot of text, a lot of background information, you know, all together. What I do want to end with, what I do want it to all come full circle to, is that I want to dedicate all these future videos, and I want to dedicate this channel to breaking down and helping everybody actually understand what Injustice 2 was, what it is, and why not only should it just be revived, but why it should be the foundation for every single future installment of any fighting game that comes into existence. It didn't get everything right. So part of all these videos and these breakdowns and, you know, like me talking over and breaking down even like high level matches, you know, and whatnot, or tech guides and whatever it may be, is showcasing all the things that it did get right, but at the same exact time also illustrating and critiquing what it got wrong and how it should have been fixed or how it should be fixed. Because I truly wholeheartedly believe that if future companies, future games, future developers actually listen to this, you actually take this blueprint and you apply it to your next installment, you're going to have a disgusting amount of success, and you're going to realize, you know, in hindsight, it's like, oh shit, we actually should have done this a lot sooner. You know, like your own hubris is basically getting in the way of, you know, the company's success within itself, or whatever franchise's, you know, success that it's not really fully achieving. You know, a lot of fighting games specifically, because it's such a niche, like even within the gaming world within itself, your base is only really there because of the old timers. It's not really there because of the newcomers. The newcomers, they might dabble a little bit, but they're not going to stick around because there's nothing worth sticking around to. You know, your current scene is really only there because of the people that you actually managed to entice, but everybody can see the numbers. You know, you can fabricate the numbers, you can fabricate the polls, but you can see it within the player base, within the number of entrants. When it comes to something like Evo, you know, you see the numbers dwindling over the years, you know. Or even when, like, I think Tekken had like the highest amount of entrants recently. The highest number amount of entrants is only like what, like 1,000 players or 1,500 players, I think. You know, like that's still really fucking low. You know, in the grand scheme of things, that still is a very, very, very low number compared to the millions, you know, for something like Fortnite. Obviously, yes, you'll argue, you know, well, it's free, you know, or it's a kid's game. or it's very easy to pick up, or it's a lot more simple. It's like, yeah, but that's basically my whole point with all of this, is that it's easy to follow. It is simple enough that people can pick it up and they can actually do well with it, and there is enough on the line to be willing to do that, to want to do that. With fighting games, there's nothing that's actually there that's worthwhile currently. So why would anybody do it? Why would anybody waste their time? The companies themselves are not helping you actually understand the game. They don't even help you understand the genre. Tekken 8's replay feature and whatnot, it can be useful, but it still doesn't teach you the game within itself. And that's a whole other topic, whole other video within itself. But I want to basically sort of like make this announcement that the future videos, from this point onward, are actually going to be with the intention and the means of legitimately breaking down all these components, all these factors, and actually trying to showcase to newcomers, to current players, to pros, to developers, to different companies, to different testers, to different overall directors, for these games. I want to actually showcase that I do understand this, and I'm trying to show all of you that you actually do not get it. And I'm trying to show you where the understanding actually is, so that way for all the future installments, we can actually perfect it as a collective, and then just take it that much further from that point onward. Thank you guys for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share. You can follow me on Twitch, Twitter, or even on YouTube. It's pretty much the same exact handle, Akromaniac27. You can also basically DM me on any one of those two. Like, it's always open. But yeah, that's it for this kind of content. Please feel free to leave comments, any kind of feedback as to either this video or what upcoming videos and upcoming topics should be covered. And that will wrap up this video. Have a good day or night, and take care.